Welcome, everyone. It's a privilege to welcome all of you to the launch of the Digitalist papers on artificial intelligence and democracy in America. I am Angela Aristidou. I am a fellow at the Stanford Digital Economy Lab and the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence and a professor at University College London. And today, in the audience, we're joined by academics from technological and non-technological disciplines. We're joined by industry leaders, and we're joined by leaders in the civil society and nonprofit sector. I want to acknowledge the diversity in this audience. I also want to acknowledge that some of you have traveled from far and wide to be here with us today, and you are most appreciated. It was not too far in the past, when only a couple of years actually, that the latest wave of artificial intelligence technologies entered into our social landscape. And it felt like a flare. And I'm looking for my clicker. There you go. And it felt like a flare, shooting into the night sky, a sudden light revealing the contours of our institutions, and democracy standing central among them. This flare provided a burst of clarity. It pushed us to take stock and to reflect on our existing institutions. It pushed us to consider the role of artificial intelligence in our democratic structures and our democratic processes, and to consider both the widespread concerns as well as the promise. The Digitalist papers are intentionally directed towards envisioning possibilities for the future of democracy, echoing the Federalist papers of the 18th century, a collection of essays which provided a roadmap of institutional innovation for the young, at the time, United States of America. The Digitalist papers offer ambitious vision setting and thoughtful examination and deliberate strategizing at the intersection of AI and democracy. We believe that the future of AI and democracy should not be allowed to simply happen to us. It is something we should all help to shape. Each of the authors in the Digitalist papers brings a different perspective, and together, this collection of essays cuts across disciplines and cuts across domains. This openness is essential for bringing forward a future that may benefit society as a whole. Throughout this afternoon, you will explore the content of this volume through focused discussions with the authors and between the authors, every one of them a unique voice in the conversation on AI and democracy. The discussions this afternoon are an invitation to you to engage actively and with openness. There's a QR code behind me which will stay active throughout the day, and you can contribute questions. But importantly, today is just the starting point. We hope that these essays will ignite conversations about how we approach AI and democracy. Let me conclude by thanking you again for joining us and introducing you to our first pair of speakers, both lead faculty for the Digitalist papers effort. Erik Bryjolfsson, a professor at the Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence and director of the Digital Economy Lab, with positions at the Institute for Economic Policy Research, the Economics Department, and the Graduate School of Business. Secretary Condoleezza Rice, the Tad and Diane Taub Director of the Hoover Institution, and the Thomas and Barbara Stevenson Senior Fellow on Public Policy. And moderating this, I am sure going to be a very exciting conversation, is Michal Lev-Ram, an editor-at-large covering the technology sector at Fortune. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Angela. Do that one.
Hi, everybody. I am really excited to kick things off today with our two very distinguished speakers, both of whom played a pivotal role in the conception and creation of the Digitalist papers, to talk about this really pivotal time and to set the stage for the rest of today's conversations. So Erik, I'm going to start with you. Can you just give us a little bit of context, take us back? How and why did this whole initiative start?
It was because we thought of this as a pivotal time, as you were just saying, and it's not the first or only pivotal time in history. Another time was in the late 1700s when, there was, from my perspective as a technologist, the steam engine igniting the Industrial Revolution, and there was an economic revolution. Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, and kind of the field of economics was born. And also another important thing was the birth of the United States and the Federalist Papers kind of providing a framework for that. And I was having this conversation with Frank McCourt. I don't know if Frank, there he is, Frank. And we were having lunch in France and talking about all the changes that are happening today and this analogy to things that happened before. And then we came with this analogy. Well, just back then there were some really smart people who weighed in and created the Federalist Papers. And it was, I got to say, a pretty successful venture that had us create a democracy that's lasted for over a couple hundred years, because they thought through some of the challenges and ways of addressing those challenges in a careful way. And I thought, well, we've got some pretty smart people around the world today, around the country today. Maybe we could have them weigh in on a similar set of challenges. And Frank and I were talking about this back and forth, and he loved the idea, and we kind of, there was kind of a creative interaction there that led us to decide to do this. I think it was the summer of 2022, and by that winter, we put together a call for papers. Actually, Sandy Pentland and Nate Pursley and Condi and I, we got together. It's interesting, we made a kind of a list of the people we would love to have involved, and we sort of made our A list, our dream list, and we knew we wouldn't get most of them, and then we had our B list, and then we had our C list, and we said, well, let's go ahead and start with the A list. And as it turns out, we never got past the A, we just got all of our dream participants. So that was kind of fun. I don't know if anyone took a picture of that whiteboard, but it's just basically the people we were hoping to have involved. So we were really happy with the way it all came together. And as you're going to hear the rest of the day today, it was just a really impressive set of thought leaders weighing in.
I'm glad you got your A-listers. It would have been kind of awkward if you had said you got the B. Yeah. But Condi, you know a thing or two about history, and I'm curious to hear your perspective on what the parallels are from this moment in time to the moment in time when the Federalist Papers came into creation.
Well, I think that Erik has really set the stage for this, and I would add the following. What did the Federalist Papers do well? The first thing was that they understood that human beings needed to work through institutions. As Madison would have said, you can't know the passions and dreams of human beings on a daily basis, and so you have to work through institutions. And so one of the questions that I think they were institutionalist, and so one of the things that we wanted to talk about is how the new world in which we're living, the transformative technology of AI that we're seeing, challenges those institutions, will push those institutions to certain limits. We're seeing it, for instance, in what AI has challenged our democracy to do and with. And so I think of this as a kind of new institutionalism. So that was one of the most important things. The second is that the founders, those who wrote the Federalist Papers, understood that there would be evolution over time. They didn't try to answer every single question. They had a certain number of philosophical views of how to think about values, how to think about those institutions and those values. But they must have understood that the Federalist Papers and the Constitution that, by the way, Federalist Papers were basically to sell the notion of the Constitution. They were pamphlets that were meant to sell the notion of the Constitution. But they understood that if it was going to survive over long periods of time, now indeed a couple of centuries and a half, that it would have to be able to accommodate change. And I think if we know anything about today's revolution in technology, it's that we don't know a lot of the answers to where this is going. And so we're going to have to be able to accommodate change as we go along. And so I think the idea of a Digitalist Papers that is a kind of extension of the notion of a Federalist Papers is completely apt for those two reasons. Know that it's going to have an impact on the institutions, and know that you're going to be in an environment of uncertainty where you cannot second guess everything, but you have to have principles and values that will guide as you meet those uncertainties.
So is the hope for this to kind of live, to exist as a dynamic set of conversations and essays? How do you foresee that?
Well, I do. I don't, in this world, just think about it. 2 years ago, we have been talking about the power of generative AI.
Yep.
And so we know that this is going to be a rapidly changing environment. And so hopefully with this, in this framework, we can continue the conversation, we can continue to push the framework, and it will allow us to deal with all of the uncertainties that are out there. But one thing that you want to do when you have uncertainty is you do want to understand some principles, some values that should guide. You don't want to feel as if you have no anchor, no mooring, and hopefully these principles and these papers will, as the Federalist Papers did, provide a kind of foundational mooring for the conversations we're going to have probably for another century.
Exactly right. I mean, this is not just dynamic, it's more dynamic. I mean, the steam engine, if you compare it to AI, it was a very massive change in the economy, but it didn't evolve nearly as fast as AI. So we're in a much more rapidly changing, we have to be dynamic. And that conversation with Frank didn't just lead to the Digitalist Papers project, but there's a whole agenda here, and we're going to hear more about it today. And it's not just creating some of the thought leadership, but it's putting things into action and developing some of the platform, some of the technological infrastructure, and some of the institutions. As Condi was saying, even as the technologies evolve, we want to have some underlying principles, and the Digitalist Papers are helping us to identify those so that those can be sort of the anchors that allow us to stay moored in a way that we don't drift too far from those principles.
And Erik, the essays delve into this in a variety of ways, but one of the interesting aspects of AI is the impact to the way information flows.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how that creates certain challenges, of course, but also opportunities?
There's immense challenges, opportunities. I mean, you know, information technology is the technology of our era, especially AI. And I think that the success of any society, any economy, any company depends to a large extent how well it manages its information flows. You can create principles, technologies, design levers that lead you to disproportionately amplify truth and innovation and cooperation, or you can disproportionately amplify misinformation and confusion and polarization. And we've seen technology platforms that do some or either of both of those things. But we have longstanding institutions in our society that are meant to try to, and the successful societies have more of them, whether it's the way a democracy chooses its laws, or a jury system tries to sift out guilt and innocence, or adversarial systems, or the scientific method, referees. There's a whole set of the scientific method is a great example. It's certainly not perfect, but if you follow some of those institutional steps, you're more likely to get to accurate, truthful, insightful answers. And by the same token, I think as we design our digital platforms for democracy, we can adjust those levers in ways that maybe we'll learn how to do a better job of amplifying, you know, truth, cooperation, and insight. I'm sure we won't get it right all the time, but if we do that, our society, our democracy, our economy is going to thrive.
Great. In the introductory essay, which you both helped write, you write that today's challenges require an ambition of imagination, and that the current technological, economic, and political crossroads demand creative rebuilding or reinvention of new institutions. And I wonder if you could both touch on what can that look like? I mean, is our existing infrastructure, whether it comes to regulatory or other aspects of governing AI and regulating AI, is it sufficient? And could AI be a fourth branch?
Well, I am one who believes that some of the institutions that we have are probably going to still be relevant. You mentioned laws, for instance.
Hope so.
We certainly hope that laws are going to be relevant. We certainly hope that the idea that there is an evidentiary database for the arguments that we make will continue to be relevant. And so I don't think we have to wipe the slate clean. And it's one reason that I like the reference again to the Federalist Papers, because this is something that has lasted for 250 years. It's probably wise to recognize that they may have left us a number of institutional answers that will help us even through this very radical set of new technologies. But because AI is in some ways challenging what it is to be human, and we're seeing more and more of that, it does raise the question of how we're going to think about these institutions that were created to both constrain and empower human beings are going to interact with the machine and the human interface. And that's one of the challenges that I think we'll have in the broadest sense. The other point I'll make is that I'm a light on the regulation side person, and there are two reasons for that. One is that so much is changing so rapidly, and regulators will regulate even if they don't understand what they regulate. And so let's try first to actually understand this technology and what its possibilities are and what its downsides are. But I also think we have to recognize, we've been talking a lot about democracy, democracy, democracy. This technology is also being pursued in circumstances of authoritarianism. And that's a very different proposition. What the Federalist Papers did was they intended to constrain human beings, but they intended human beings to understand those constraints and that those constraints would not be arbitrary. In authoritarian regimes, those constraints are arbitrary. They're the will of one person. And when we go through AI and we look at its power, I want that to be pursued, and I want to run as hard and fast as possible, because I always want to be ahead of authoritarians in this space. We will have debates about what AI can do, what it should do, what it shouldn't do. We will have investigative reporters who will report on what it should do, what it can do, what it has done. We will have congressional hearings. There will be parliamentary hearings. In authoritarian regimes, you will not have those safeguards and those guardrails. And so I'm in the run hard and fast category, and be a little bit light-handed with the regulation, especially while we're still trying to understand what we're looking at here.
So I don't think AI will be a fourth branch, but building on what Connie said, I think it's going to enhance some of the other ones. I've always been somebody who sees AI as augmenting people more than replacing them or standing aside from them. I'm a professor at the Institute for Human-Centered AI, and that goes deep in my research and my thinking. And one thing that hasn't been thought of as much as it could be, before we did the Digitalist papers, is the way AI can enhance democracy and enhance some of these institutions. So we're going to hear today, Larry Lessig's going to talk about extending the idea of juries and other things. Sandy Pentland and Lily Tsai wrote about using some of the tools that we've seen in Taiwan and elsewhere that extend deliberative democracy. So my hope is, Connie raised some concerns, some challenges that AI could be used to enhance authoritarianism, and I know that they want to do that, but we can also use it to enhance democracy. And it is a bit of a race there, and I hope that the Digitalist papers will give us a leg up or a head start to be able to think harder about how AI can not just preserve the democracy we have, but maybe make it better in some ways, make it more inclusive, more successful, more agile. And from what I've seen in the essays, I'm optimistic that's the case.
You bring up a very good point, many very good points, and I want to go back to geopolitics too. But it's interesting, we've seen such a backlash, a techlash, right, over the last few years, and a lot of increasing scrutiny. First on the role of social media in misinformation. Yeah. We've come a long way from everybody celebrating, former President Obama's incredible use of technology to now being really frightened of some of the things going on. So is part of the intent also to, of course, be careful and cautious and raise some of the alarms and talk about that, but also to provide some optimistic views of what the future could look like?
Well, let me build on what Connie said earlier about the touch of regulation. I think before we go too far down regulation, we want to understand better what the implications are. And with the first wave of social media, I think there's a lot of excitement, but there wasn't a lot of thinking carefully about what the implications are. There's the slogan, move fast and break things. And I think that social scientists weren't thinking hard enough about some of the implications. And now we've seen it had some wonderful ways of connecting people, but also had some destructive ways. I mean, to give you a kind of a concrete example, when you use machine learning to optimize social media for engagement, that seems like a good thing. You want to get people involved. Well, it turns out that often the reward function that maximizes engagement also, I think largely inadvertently, maximizes lies, because those are more surprising than truth oftentimes, because they don't have to adhere to the laws of physics. And often they amplify polarization and hatred, because it seems that people are more likely to respond to certain kinds of posts. So you end up amplifying a lot of things that you didn't probably intend to amplify, and people hadn't thought through a little bit the ways that do it. So alongside technologists pushing the frontier, which is amazing, and inventing new things in AI and digital technologies more broadly, social scientists, economists, political scientists, sociologists, psychologists need to catch up and need to work harder. And right now, they have been keeping up, and it's on my profession and others to work harder on that. And one of the things that we're seeing in the Digitalist papers is people from civil society, from academia, beyond technology, are beginning to work a little bit harder. And my hope is that as these next waves of technology come along, it won't just be technologists inventing cool things. There's also be people thinking about, okay, what are the implications of this, and how can we do it in a way that guides us towards the kind of goals that most of us want?
I would just add that I think we're going to have to use the educational process and the process of convening to try to make each other multilingual about what we're seeing. There are technologists and computer scientists, and then there are people who understand political institutions and history and the arts, and they wouldn't normally exist in the same body, but something like the Human-Centered AI project, what we're trying to do at Hoover with the Stanford Emerging Technology Review, the idea is that we need people in the same conversation who are pushing the frontiers of the technology with the people who, if they don't understand that, would probably be either frightened or reticent, and we need them to be partners as we move forward. And so one of the things we're seeing at a place like Stanford is a lot of our students are now interested in doing a degree in computer science and I recently had a student in computer science and religious studies. I think that's terrific, because we do have to become multilingual if we're going to avoid the kinds of downfalls that Erik was talking about that we experience with social media. I mean, I just don't think people thought it through. They didn't see the implications of that kind of algorithm that would produce the response that you mentioned.
And it's a testament to the power of this technology. I think for a while it could be sort of silent, but now it's affecting politics, it's affecting the economy, it's affecting maybe religion, a lot of other areas. And the class I teach, that Condoleezza was nice enough to be a guest lecturer at, we intentionally have about a third of them as computer scientists, economists, people from other parts of the university. And the amazing thing, as Condoleezza was saying about Stanford University, is that you get like some of the world's best people in all of those areas and bring them together and start having this multilingual conversation. And that's what's sorely needed.
And it's very evident also this multidisciplinary approach in the essays and the authors of the essays themselves.
Yes.
I want to go back to the geopolitics thread. You've talked about how we're seeing this reemergence for the first time since World War II of this great power conflict. Of course, AI is in the picture now, as you said. So what are your big thoughts, your takeaways on how you balance the way we're moving forward and some element of caution and thoughtfulness, of course, and ethics, while at the same time not falling behind? Because that is such a tough balance.
The first thing I would say is that there was a lot of fear of falling behind because I remember the arguments really just a couple of years ago. Well, China was going to dominate in AI because they were going to have a lot of data to train the models because, after all, they don't have privacy concerns and so forth. Well, it turns out that hasn't been the case because we made the leap into generative AI. It's also the case that authoritarians are kind of interesting in that they start putting constraints on the future of innovation. And so it turns out that if you're going to train a model, you also have to train it in Xi Jinping thought. So that's not necessarily going to push the frontiers. So sometimes we don't have enough confidence in the creativity and innovation of open societies, and we get very fearful of what closed societies will be able to do. So I'm pretty confident, but I want my confidence to be buttressed by actual policy. And so what is the policy? And as I said, let's run hard and fast. We will run hard and fast within the context of our ethics, within the context of trying to find truth, within the context of democracy, because that's who we are. And we will recognize, and I sometimes just do a thought experiment, suppose Nazi Germany had won the race to a nuclear weapon. Right. It would have been a very different world. And so because I think that democracy has these guardrails that simply don't exist in authoritarian regimes, it's not just that they will use these technologies for social control and for nefarious purposes, but it's that they will do what they did about COVID, which is that they'll cover up. They won't tell the truth. We won't know what is going on. And I've been talking recently with people in the intelligence world about the following question: how do we not get strategic surprise on AI when we get up one day and we learn that an authoritarian regime has perfected fill in the blank? Well, I think we want to keep an eye on it, of course, but we also want to make sure that we completely enhance our own innovation. We need to figure out what the proper role of government is in doing so. Government is not very good at choosing winners and losers. But we know that after World War II, the US government invested a lot in fundamental research through NSF and through the Defense Department and through the Energy Department. And are we really, as a nation, investing in that kind of fundamental research? I talk often, we've talked a lot at HAI about the fact that no university nor combination of universities has the compute power to do what a lot of the commercial sector can do. Is that really acceptable for us? So we've got some big policy decisions to make, but I want them all to be trained on what will enhance the leadership of the United States and its democratic allies on this extremely important technology.
I've got a couple of great questions from the audience. So in the remaining time, I'm going to ask you for very quick responses. They're both complex, but do your best. So for you, Condi, can we have the equivalent of the Marshall Plan, where the US invests massively to show up AI capabilities in areas where such technologies are lacking to non-existent?
Well, I do think there's a question of spreading the technology. Look, I think that people talk about the democratization of AI, all right? So the area that I'm most concerned about as somebody in diplomacy is that there are parts of the world where we're having this conversation and they feel left out. So the global south, where actually you do have some technological capacity. I mean, India has tremendous technological capacity. We ought to be having that conversation with other parts of the world too, so that this doesn't become just a kind of United States and a few allies.
Right.
So that, to me, is a major thing. The other is to make sure that these technologies are affecting parts of the United States that might be left out of the conversation. And so I think if we just make this an elite conversation, we're going to maybe leave some talent on the playing field, but we will also enhance, I think, a lot of discontent and maybe even jealousy, which we don't need at this point. So Global South and rest of America, absolutely.
I couldn't agree more with that, and it's one of the biggest challenges we're going to face, because some of these technologies can naturally bring people together and level up. Like we did some research in call centers where that happened. But if we're not careful, they can also be used to have some of the leaders just pull away, both within the United States and across countries. And that would be catastrophic.
Well, I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but we have a lot of really great content to get to. So I want to thank Erik and Condi for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.